Hello, students. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you're tuning in. Today, we're going to be covering Module 5, Arts, Culture, and Social Life. Let's start with a quick mental image, if we shall, right? Imagine you're swiping on a dating app. I know that might not be a great moment for us, but let's imagine. Each tap and swipe isn't just a search for connection. It's a data exchange with an algorithm that may know your quote-unquote type better than your best friend. Crazy, right? Or think about the last song you discovered on TikTok, let's say. Did you fall in love with the full track? Or was it the 12-second chorus that's burrowed into your brain like a jingle, like an earworm? So today, with that mental image, we're going to be diving into how technology doesn't just deliver culture, it organizes, fragments, and even remixes it. Our guiding thesis in this media conversation is that media technologies are not neutral vessels for communication. They actively shape our senses, our identities, and our emotional lives. Drawing on concepts from Marshall McLuhan in your readings, Matthewman, Foucault, and the platform case studies like TikToks, Spotify, and Tinder, we'll examine how culture is produced, performed, and consumed in the digital age, and how the tools we use are also shaping who we are allowed to be. And this is where we're going to start our conversation today. So, in this conversation that we are importantly having today, it gets into the readings that you'll be doing with The Medium is the Message by McLuhan. So let's begin with Marshall McLuhan, the media theorist who told us the medium is the message. What he meant was deceptively simple but profoundly disruptive. The form of the medium, the way it delivers content, has more powerful impact on society than the actual content itself. It's not about what you say in a TikTok. It's about the fact that TikTok exists in the way that it does, or any medium platform does in the way it does, but specifically in this example. The structure of a platform, its speed, its sensory demands, those are the real architects of social behavior. And a little anecdote from me. If you haven't caught on in all of these lectures, I am very like insecure about my rate of speech. I'm aware how fast it is. But ironically, I've been told by plenty of students, not all students, but plenty of students, that due to the nature of the things that they listen to on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, right, that they're used to listening things at 2 times speed. I would not suggest listening to me at 4 times speed unless you like chipmunks, but the rate of my speech has become normalized through media consumption to the point where students have told me, to my surprise, that my rate of speech actually keeps them engaged and that it's not monotone or that it's not just kind of like dragging on and slow and it keeps them like somehow more engaged in my in-person lectures. I hope that translates onto this medium as well. But isn't that interesting? That's something that I was insecure about when I was first in the sales world and I had to listen to my presentations. My wife had to do this too when we were both in the sales world. We're both in totally different careers now. But we had to listen to our calls. And that was really surprising to us because I found my voice translated better than I thought it would, but I know I talk fast. And I'm from Chicago, so I'm able to kind of say, like, oh, I'm from Chicago. But anyway, it's interesting how the medium, right, is the message. And it's fascinating. So TikTok is a perfect example, as I've been talking about. This platform, right, it rewards engagement, emotional intensity, and spectacle in a tight 15-second loop. If you don't catch your viewer in the first 2 seconds, the algorithm buries your video, period, right? We see what we see isn't the best content, Chad, but the most clickable. That's not an accident. It's the product of intentional platform design that prioritizes metrics over meaning. As McLuhan would argue, this rewires our perception. We begin to internalize the platform's logic, speed over nuance, virality over vulnerability. Some would say that a slow speaking and very well kind of articulated inference by other folk would have been seen as better articulation in speech than a fast talking, blonde haired, blue eyed kid from Chicago. But that concept, we begin to internalize the platform's logic, speed over nuance, virality over vulnerability. So Matthewman builds on this by introducing the idea of platform capitalism, where artistic expression becomes algorithmic labor. Going viral isn't fun, it's survival. And here is where Pierre Bardou's concept of cultural capital becomes essential. To succeed online, you need not only taste and talent, but also fluency in what is quote unquote trending, what's aesthetic, and what the algorithm likes. Add in algorithmic capital, and we start to see success determined by how well your content plays to the platform's invisible rules. Here's a fun little anecdote for you again. In my first year of teaching, when Bones the pug was still alive, it was a big deal, and everyone would hop on TikTok to know if they're having a bad or a good day. Depending how chronically online you are, you might remember this. And it was always a bones or a no bones day. And I remember I would put that into my lecture slides, and students told me they loved it. They said it was interesting and it made them laugh to know if it was a bones or a no bones day. My boss at the time actually had a immediate Zoom with me, an emergency Zoom, to tell me that that could be taken as offensive. And they didn't understand why I would write no bones day. And it's because they weren't internet savvy. They weren't aware at the time that that was a trending virality that actually connected with a lot of the youth in my classes. And I was trying to meet the students at their medium, right, at their level. And it was an interesting intersection of conversation between an older colleague and me. So we can take this even further, what we're talking about, with Walter Benjamin, who warned us in 1936, pick up six, that mechanical reproduction would strip art of its aura, its unique presence in time and space. Today, a heart-wrenching ballad about grief becomes the soundtrack for a recipe video. Meaning floats, right? Gets reassigned and repurposed endlessly. A 12-second audio snippet replaces the entire emotional arc. Art doesn't disappear, no, but its context, its texture, its aura collapses. Think about the idea of the song that's tied to the JetBlue holiday right now. The song's losing its position, but everybody, like when they hear that song, wants to do that entire kind of earworm. Nothing beats a Jet2 holiday, right? Like this may not age well. I'll have to change this video by putting it in there, but in the moment, that is what's exploding right now. So Marshall McLuhan's concept of the medium as the message disrupts this assumption that technology is just neutral vehicle for communication. Instead, he asserts that every medium subtly rewires human perception and reorganizes our social environment, often more than the content it carries. And it's something to start kind of thinking about, right? Like this is on your slide. Content doesn't matter as much as the form that delivers it. TikTok trains us in brevity, spectacle, speed, and brain rot. Platform rewards clickability, not necessarily meaning. Going viral, survival in a platform economy. Rage bait can be better than honesty or openness. A moment of expression or exposure in a moment of these moments builds to our understanding. So this is where he's saying the medium is the message, right? And that McLuhan would argue that it's not TikTok's problem, right? This would be a big part. This logic enforces the idea that we just talked about, brevity, emotional salience, and visual impact. It trains both the creators and viewers to expect satisfaction within seconds. What has that done to our social engagement? What results in a kind of structural impatience where content must hit hard and fast or be disregarded entirely? This isn't a glitch per se, it's by design. The platform's architecture is built to maximize retention and engagement, which also means reconditioning our capacity for depth, nuance, and delayed gratification, so to speak. And again, McLuhan would argue that this isn't a TikTok problem, it's a civilization problem. Every new medium transfers not only our habits, but the architecture of our consciousness. That's crazy to think about, right? Print trained us to think literally, right? Television introduced simultaneously, right? And think about the song, Video Killed the Radio Star. It was set in a song. And now social video platforms introduce fragmentation. The rise of meme culture and short form media represents a kind of cognitive remixing, where irony, effect, and speed over explanation or analysis. This also raises the question about political implications of media. If our public sphere is now mediated through platforms that favor emotional punchlines over deliberation, what happens to collective understanding or democracy itself? McLuhan wasn't just offering a media critique. He was warning that when media becomes the extensions of ourselves, they also become the infrastructures for how we imagine society in general. And that's where we kind of look at this reading that I hope you'll take some more nuanced concepts through as well. But that's going to bring us to our next reading, which is this conversation that Matthewman has. And I want to also bring in C. Wright Mills, right, and the cheerful robot. That's why you see the image there. But building on McLuhan's insights that media reshape not just what we think about, how we think. Matthewman introduces the concept of subjective machines, right? So the happy robot, the cheerful robot is C. Wright Mills. And technologies and the subjective machines is the Matthewman idea. Technologies that don't merely extend our capabilities, but actively participate in shaping our identities. These are tools that feel us, know us, and increasingly define us. Take Spotify. It's not just music, right? It's not just music streaming platform. It's a mirror, one that tracks our emotional rhythms, curates your preferences, and packages your inner life into data. right? Your Spotify Wrap doesn't just show what you listen to per se. It tells a story about who you are. It translates mood swings, genre preferences, and niche microgenres like cottage-core ambience or main character energy or yacht rock into a digestible aesthetic identity. In Bardot terms, right, this becomes cultural capital, a way of signaling taste, subcultural fluency, and even social worth. An interesting point, those who are a fan of docs, right, and those who are a fan of kind of various types of combat boots, they weren't aware with Martins that there was this kind of conversation. And that's another tangent for another time. I'm sorry. But it's also a form of self-branding where identity is curated and performed in ways designed for public legibility, not personal authenticity. So this is where I was talking about before, where C. Wright Mills was warning about this in his work and the idea of the cheerful robot, and becoming especially relevant here. Mills envisioned individuals who, shaped by bureaucratic rationality, move through life adapting to the systems they no longer question. Today, that robot smiles while posting TikTok dances, right? Shares your hyper-specific playlists and lets algorithms suggest not just what to watch or listen to, but how to feel. And that's crazy. Matthewman reminds us that technology today, it does not simply serve us. They structure the range of who we can be. They are no longer background tools per se. They're identity scaffoldings. And following Foucault, a consistent theme in our class, we can understand that these platforms as disciplining mirrors. We don't just look into them. We learn how to regulate ourselves by what they reflect back. Our devices coach us on what moods are marketable, what selves are desirable, what aesthetics are most visible. The feedback loop is intimate, right? It's also imminent and intimate, but it's also political, y'all. And this takes us directly into Foucauldian concept of biopower that we've discussed a lot in this class. The management of life not through force, but through subtle systems that teach us to govern ourselves. Today's biopower is algorithmic. We're not just surveilled, right? We are seduced into self-regulation by feedback metrics, visibility scores, and engagement loops. Platforms like Spotify, TikTok don't force us to conform. They reward certain performances and quietly marginalize others. This is Foucauldian's technologies of the self in action, right? Digital systems that teach us to manage and curate our identities on a regular basis in ways that align with the market logic. The result is the visibility becomes synonymous with value, and identity becomes a branding exercise. We aren't just making playlists, we're signaling who we are and how we want to be understood. It formats that increasingly optimized for algorithmic approval. And this is where Sherry Turkle also adds critical depth, right? She describes these platforms as mirrors, spaces where we, the collective we, practice being ourselves. Very dramaturgical Goffman, right? Presentation of self in everyday life. But like funhouse mirrors, they distort. They offer reflections, but also within the limitations or limits of the platform's UX and UI design, or the user interface or user experience design. A Be Real notification may feel spontaneous, right? But it's still timed, right? An Apple screen time report may feel like insight, but it's still behavior quantified by productivity standards of who set those, right? These are not passive data outputs. They are acts of storytelling structured by the logic of the platform. They ask you to make sense of yourself in data terms. We're not, right? Minutes spent, genres streamed, people tagged, and in doing so, they make us only certain versions of the self possible, right? As Matthewman writes, these machines don't just respond to subjectivity, they shape the conditions under which it becomes legible, marketable, and real. So what does that mean for identity today? It means who we are is increasingly co-authored by the platforms we inhabit. And while these spaces feel empowering or expressive, we must ask, who benefits from these versions of us that is always visible, always performing, and always being optimized for someone else's metrics? Something to think about with this article. So, like I mentioned, here's kind of a pullback. When we look at Foucault and Turkle in the surveillance of self, platforms regulate us through feedback. TikTok's FYP page is a panopticon, but you built it brick by brick, right? Be Real is not real. It's scheduled spontaneity. You are rewarded for compliance, visibility, and legibility. And think about the streaks, y'all. If you let them die, is your friendship not worth it? If you're, think of all the things like when you send your partner, you send your friend and they don't watch it, or the debate between when it's one day late to Instagram, but it's on TikTok. You can restore these, by the way, with kind of capitalism, platform capitalism, to pay money to maintain that streak, to maybe not let your friend know you missed it or maintain kind of that connection. My wife has a streak with her friend that's been going for a very, very, very long time. I'm already up pretty high because she wanted to start it, but then it became something that sometimes I just maintain so that my wife doesn't ask me why I didn't send her something. What if I'm super busy at work? Or what if my wife's super busy at work and she can't send it to her friend? It becomes this kind of panopticon, self-regulation, a prison of our own, right? Surveillance is preference. Identity is engagement metrics. But this brings us to a kind of interesting conversation of Goffman, Foucault, and platform performances, as you're seeing on the screen here, right? So Irving Goffman, one of my favorites, developed the concept of dramatological theory, right? It reminds us that social life is a stage, and we are all performers navigating different front stages depending on our audience. In the digital age, however, the audience isn't just human anymore. It's not the people to people always, it's algorithmic too. Platforms like TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn don't merely provide you space for performance per se. They structure it, score it, and circulate it, right? I'm getting constant reminders right now on my Instagram, my LinkedIn, sorry, to make sure to claim and verify my account so people don't distrust the authenticity. Y'all, that's my profile that I've had since literally like 2006. It's as authentic as it can be. I have over 500 in contacts. I have been on it for years, but they're like, hey, if you don't have a blue check mark, no one's going to know it's you. And to do so is going to come at a cost in some capacities. Also, like authenticity on Twitter, you can buy it verification. If you grew up in my time, verification was for celebrities. So that's now changing how I present in society, right? So on TikTok, for example, you aren't just posting a video. You're entering a feedback system where every microsecond of content is evaluated for virality. The algorithm tracks retention, facial expression, lighting, language, and rhythm, shaping not only what gets seen, but what is worth creating. This isn't Goffman's static stage. It's a dynamic, data-driven theater where the performer is in constant negotiation with visibility, shifting rules, right? So now let's bring into this conversation chat Michel Foucault's surveillance theory from Discipline and Punish. Foucault's key insight is that power is most effective not when it punishes, but when it's internalized by you and I. In the modern age, the panopticon, a metaphor for surveillance that is constant, unverifiable, and total, has migrated into our devices. The For You page is a digital panopticon that you built brick by brick, you think, right? It's supposed to justify how your tastes are. What side of TikTok are you on? It's a funny conversation. And then dictates how your mental state is in kind of the chronically online conversation. It doesn't just know your tastes, it actively shapes them. What it promotes becomes what you desire. As a social construct, how much of our society is driven by that kind of conspicuous consumption that we discussed earlier with Veblen and Thorstein Veblen's work. You scroll not freely, but through the tunnel of a personalized predictions. And you adjust your own behavior, your speech cadence, and your aesthetic choices, your engagement style, to align with the system's reward. That's governmentality, y'all. The internalization of surveillance as preference. You don't feel like you're being controlled. You feel like you're optimizing. Weird, huh? Even micro gestures become loaded with social meaning. On Apple computers, if you have the new one and you raise your hand, sometimes it'll do gestures or emotes from your screen. I've had a situation where someone was talking about the loss of their grandparents in a class, and they moved their hand and party balloons came down. What? Right? It's crazy. These micro gestures are loaded with social meanings. Now take people like me. I'm a millennial. The millennial pause is real, right? That half-second delay before someone speaks on camera, getting ready to talk, but that wasn't something that Gen Z observed. They observed to make fun of us. Or how about the Gen Z stare right now? That's a big thing too, in kind of that mentality that you've been governed and lived through these kind of devices has led to this kind of like dead stare when you're talking to somebody. Is that actually a response to danger mentality, or what is that? On TikTok, this has become a generational faux pas, mocked for its awkwardness and perceived algorithmic illiteracy. That tiny beat, once unconscious, now becomes the symbol of who gets the platform, right? In Bourdieu's language, right, this is habitus, the embodied knowledge that signals social belonging. Failure to hit the right rhythm or speech or cut a video with the expected pacing becomes a sign that you don't possess the necessary cultural capital to succeed in this space, in this environment. Performance is not just metaphorical, it's algorithmically choreographed. You've got to make moves, right? What used to be an interpersonal act of impression management is now platform-mediated performance economy. Say that 5 times fast. Where legibility, fluency, and speed are now the new credentials of visibility. So Goffman gave us the frame. Foucault showed us the mechanisms of power beneath it. And Bardou explains why some people can perform fluently while others fall flat. The system doesn't just reflect performance, it privileges certain styles of performance. And in the age of code, in the age of AI, they're calling it now, those styles are increasingly written by the machine, right? And this is where we get to have a little bit more fun today. So we're going to bring in Pronk and Bauman's Love and Liquid Intimacy, y'all. So let's get to it and have that conversation. So Tila Pronk's research on dating apps introduces the concept of rejection mindset, a psychological state shaped by platforms like Tinder, Hinge, Bumble, and Raya, where users become conditioned to make split-second emotional decisions. Swiping isn't just an action, it becomes a cognitive reflex. Intimacy is gamified. The logic of relating is replaced by the logic of ranking. Each profile is judged in a fraction of a second based on visual cues and strategic self-descriptions. Another Goffmanian stage, right? The app encourages us to treat people not as potential partners with native depth, but as data points in queue. From Foucauldian lens, this was a clear example of, again, biopower applied to the domain of desire. Your preferences, attractions, and even moments of vulnerability are not private. They're filtered, ranked, and monetized through algorithmic systems that turn emotional labor into behavioral predictions. The more you swipe, the more the app learns, and the more it trains you in return. So this is where we can see Bauman's concept of liquid love becomes indispensable. In a digital world saturated with infinite options of low-friction interactions, commitment itself becomes destabilized by, say. Why settle down, Bauman asks, when the platform promises endless possibility just one swipe away? Tinder doesn't merely reflect modern intimacy, it restructures it. Long-term stability feels irrational. With the interface designed for short-term gratification, relationships become fragile, optional, and disposable. A big thing right now is the light phones, right? A big movement towards removing text so that we are not as controlled by it. Many people are reversing inside apps like Hinge and Tinder, mostly Hinge, where they are meeting up for friend meetups, and it's more now cultural currency to find someone IRL as opposed to on these apps. So that's fascinating looking at Bauman's work. But here's where we must apply the social construction of technology to avoid the trap of technological determinism. As Matthew Min reminds us, Tinder's architecture, the swipe, the minimal profile, the match notification, didn't have to exist in this form. These were design choices that encode values, efficiency, instant judgment, surface level connection. The swipe interface promotes a particular philosophy of love, fast, transactional, and always subjective to replacement. Even the way users curate their bios reflect this shift. Phrases like fluent in memes, ask me about Letterboxd, or hot girl walk enthusiast aren't just quirky taglines and cheesy. They are identity signals optimized for cultural resonance and matchability. They compress complexity into algorithm-friendly shorthand. So in Bourdieu's terms, right? Bourdieu's terms, I can't say that name today, I'm sorry. These bio-performance symbolic capital, right? Signaling aesthetic taste, humor, or niche cultural fluency that might appeal to someone else's filtered bubble. Bourdieu, the goal isn't to express selfhood, it's to win the swipe. What begins as intimacy has become a form of affective labor, branding oneself for an invisible, automated marketplace of attention. The danger, of course, is that over time we begin to understand ourselves through these flattened signals, through likes, matches, and swipe metrics, until even our most personal feelings are shaped by the performance requirements of the platform. So this is really big to think about the gamified rejection that these things can reinforce. Something to really think about, y'all. But that leads us into our next conversation, which is Dan Wheatley's TikTok and platform compliance, right? So Whatley's analysis of TikTok's influence on the music industry reveals a fundamental shift, not just in how music is consumed, but in how it's conceived, structured, and released. In the traditional model, artists wrote songs with arcs, verses, emotional build-up, and payoff. But TikTok's short form, right, looping structures has rewritten the rules of musical production. Songs are now engineered for virality, front-loaded with catchy hooks designed to grab attention in the first few seconds. The musical form is compressed for algorithmic appeal. This is not just stylistic change per se, it's a systemic or systematic one, right? When Halsey, the famous artist, right, label famously refused to release her song until it performed well on TikTok, we witness what Whatleys would call algorithmic gatekeeping, artistic expression held hostage by the platform metrics and the prediction of virality. TikTok doesn't just simply distribute or diffuse music, it governs what counts as music worth making. That's terrifying. And here's where Pierre Bardot's concept of symbolic violence becomes essential. Symbolic violence refers to the subtle, invisible ways in which dominant systems enforce their values by making them appear natural. TikTok enacts this violence, right, by rewarding content that conforms to its viral logic and marginalizing work that doesn't. Ew. Artists must tailor their creativity to the platform structure or risk obscurity. That's weird. So this pressure is internalized, right? This pressure is internalized. Musicians begin self-censoring, crafting content not for artistic development per se, but for performative viability. And as we talked about earlier, but as to the theorist that we've been discussing a lot, Marshall McLuhan, would remind us this is no accident. Again, the medium is the message, means that the platform doesn't just transmit content, it reshapes its very form. TikTok's design isn't neutral, it's affordances. Looping video, autoplay, sound trending, constructs of a new genre of cultural production. Songs must be memeable, danceable, repeatable. They must fit the feed. And how has that impacted people when they're going to the bar or when they are engaging with each other in the clubs and the opinions of how we interact with one-on-one? This extends beyond what we're talking about with TikTok. So Matthewman describes this as part of the broader platformization of culture, where user behavior, creative choice, and even desire itself are molded by algorithmic systems. Artists, like users, are no longer just creators. They're performers in a platform economy, judged not by musicality, but by metrics. And this raises important questions. Where is the space for slow art, for experimentation, or for risk? What happens when the logic of cultural production is dictated not by human audiences per se, but by predictive data models? In this world, creativity becomes compliance, and the boundaries of expression are drawn not by imagination per se, but by what performs in the feed most effectively. And this is where we see that music is now made for loops, not listening. Songs front-loaded for hooks and virality. Halsey's example is a great one. Can you think of any others for Yellow Dig? Benjamin's loss of aura now means art is made for feed. Sound is equal meme currency, right? Nothing beats a JetBlue holiday or Jet2 because no one even says JetBlue now. And creativity over compliance. Also, think about that. It's supposed to be about a holiday trip for a brand, but now it's like when you hear that sound, you know something's about to go wrong. And this brings us into Peter Stone's microsong. So Peter Stone's analysis of microsong captures a key transformation in music under platform capitalism per se. Songs are no longer built for radio, album flow, or even live performances. They're built for the feed, y'all. These tracks are engineered for 15 seconds of an emotional punch. How does that translate to the concerts? Optimized to go viral on TikTok and Instagram Reels. This platform native format rewards brevity, spectacle, and remix potential over lyrical or sonic development. As Walter Benjamin warned us in the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, art's aura is presence in time and space. Its embedded meaning and authorship is lost in the age of the constant duplication. But on TikTok, that aura doesn't just vanish, it's stripped, repurposed, and redeployed at scale. Take the case of Mitski's Washing Machine Heart, a song about detachment and emotional numbness on TikTok, often remixed into the lip sync skits and thirst traps. Olivia Rodrigo's Vampire gets trailed as 15-second hook to test virality before the full albums are released. Meanings detaches from intent. It becomes floating cultural currency. And now ask yourself, do you know the artist or do you just know the hook? This is the condition of music in the age of platform capitalism, where artists aren't just performers, they're marketers, content strategists, and effective laborers. And this is where Artists like Hobo Johnson, Will Wood become important because both are known for being raw, genre blending, and lyrically experimental, deeply emotional, but also intentionally chaotic. Hobo Johnson mixes slam poetry with hip hop and confessionals. Will Wood performs theatrical, manic, and genre jumps between cabaret, punk, and indie pop. On their own terms, they are embodiments of authentic disruption, artists who challenge the polished norms of the industry. But on TikTok, their content is often fragmented into sound bites, if even on anything, right? A single screamed lyric, a funny face, or a bizarre transition. In this environment, the aesthetic resistance becomes an aestheticized. That's hard to say, sorry. Their authenticity is consumed into microdoses without native narrative or arc, right? What Benjamin called aura is consumed in the form of quirky sad boy energy or neurodivergent core. Their complex selves become readable tropes flattened into trends. Matthewman's subjective machines are at work here. The platform doesn't just distribute artists' identities, it reinterprets and repackages it into algorithmic terms. A Will Wood song about suicidal ideation becomes a viral TikTok song. A Hobo Johnson scream about heartbreak becomes a meme for awkwardness. The platform doesn't host authenticity, it refines it into platform legibility. Even artists who critique the system about become subject to it. Their songs trend not because of meaning, but because of performance potential. In Bardot terms, cultural capital is not through musical innovation, but through alignment with platform aesthetics. Do your lyrics loop well? Can your face be stitched into a duet? Right? Think of the famous video of people making bloopers, falling over, and then it being, no matter what you do, right? Like people were getting hurt, but that fit into the chorus. So will your hook survive out of context? This is the paradox of the platform age. Artists who try to push against the grain may still find themselves rewarded only when they're compliant in form, if not in content. As Stone, Benjamin, and Matthewman would all agree, the medium doesn't just reshape the message, it reshapes itself. And this is where we can look at AI intimacy and culture lag. This brings us to the classic sociological concept of cultural lag, coined by William Ogburn, which refers to the delay between technological innovation and the development of social norms, laws, and institutions to manage consequences. In today's world, we are living in a state of extreme culture lag when it comes to AI intimacy. We now have chatbots that provide therapy, AI-generated lovers, companions, and media so convincingly human, quote unquote, that it's hard to distinguish simultaneous simulation from reality. And yet, we lack the shared ethical language, regulatory structure, or even a cultural expectation to govern these relationships. What is care when it's coded? What is consent when the other party is an algorithm? And here's where Foucault's biopower is crucial. Power today operates not only by disciplining our bodies, but by shaping our feelings and desires. The rise of emotionality, emotionally responsive AI, whether as a virtual friend, lover, or therapist, is direct extensions of this conversation of Foucauldian concepts. These machines reflect your preferences, mirror your mood, and offer comforting feedback. But in doing so, they're governing the emotional terrain. You're not just guided by what you want, you're guided by the machines confirms is desirable. This is software governance, deeply intimate and increasingly visible. Cheryl Turkle called this illusion of companionship without the demand of relationship. We offload our need for connection onto systems that never disagree, challenge, or reject us. And while that may feel empowering, it creates an emotional environment where fiction, conflict, and emotional labor are no longer part of the intimacy. Instead, we turn to optimized affirmation, delivered algorithmically. And this is where you think of the theorist Agnew, who has the concept of general strain theory, or GST, becomes relevant. Agnew argued that strain arises when individuals experience a gap between aspiration and means, loss of positive stimuli, and exposure to the negative stimuli, and lack healthy coping mechanisms. In a society marked by emotional disconnection, increased loneliness, and declined social trust, many people are facing relational strain. They desire meaningful connection, validation, and support, but lack the institutional, relational, or personal means to consistently achieve it. And we see that with the loneliness epidemic and with men, but also the conversation of connection and third spaces going away and kind of having those different ties, second and third ties. When real relationships are perceived as risky, unreliable, or emotionally taxing, AI intimacy becomes the alternative coping mechanism. Chatbots don't leave. AI girlfriends don't argue. The machines always know your love language, which, by the way, Chaplin is a horrible person. From a GST perspective, or that general strain theory, AI functions as a substitute coping tool, a response to the unmet emotional needs, loss of supportive relationships, or chronic exposure to relational stress. But instead of resolving the underlying strain, it reframes emotional goalposts, so to speak. You don't need to be understood by others. You just need to feel understood by the machine. Deus ex machina. The devil is in the machine, right? This form of strain response might not be result in traditional deviance, but it reflects as a broader sociological withdrawal from human intimacy and a reliance on systems that may reinforce isolation, not resolve it. When AI becomes the primary tool for managing stress, loneliness, or rejection, we are not just adapting, we're institutionalizing avoidance. This is the danger of cultural lag. The tools are seductive, fast, and emotionally fluent, but our norms, ethics, and institutions are still catching up. In the meantime, we're building digital intimacy without accountability, relying on simulations, to soothe the very strain that come from our fraying social fabric. As one quote puts it inside your reading, and in general, just a quote, we are building digital mirrors, but forgetting they are funhouse mirrors. We are building digital mirrors, but forgetting they are funhouse mirrors. They reflect something real, but distorted, optimized, and curated. And when strain meets simulation, we may mistake comfort for connection and automation for intimacy. And as your slide's been up here, we're going to quickly cover a little Scott and Ant analysis regarding our readings. So to synthesize everything we've explored so far, which is a lot, Matthewman brings us to the two major social frameworks that help us decode our technological world, the social construction of technology and Ant, actor network theory. So we'll begin with Scott, right? The core insight of Scott is that technology is never inevitable. It doesn't evolve according to some neutral or internal logic of progress. Rather, technologies are shaped by human decisions, institutional pressures, and cultural values. Take Tinder, for example. It didn't have to be a swipe, right? The swipe wasn't required by the mobile interface. It was a design choice loaded with meaning. That choice encoded a particular philosophy, efficiency, binary judgment, gamification. It could have just been built to emphasize dialogue, comfortability, or emotional depth. It wasn't. Similarly, TikTok's looping short-form video weren't a technical necessity, right? That format reflects a cultural priority on brevity, repetition, and visual impact. Think about the idea that Reitzer brought of the McDonaldization of society. Scott forces us to ask what values are embedded in these tools and who benefits from them. So the next look would be from the actor network theory, which pushes us to see technology not as a standalone artifact, but as a part of a web of relations between people, devices, institutions, interfaces, and code. Your Spotify playlist might feel like a deeply personal expression of your taste. But Ant reminds us it's also shaped by the corporate licensing deals, the algorithmic filtering, peer listing behaviors, and platform incentives. You, the user, aren't acting on the system. You're being acted upon, shaped, and constructed by it. Your taste doesn't float in a vacuum. It is constantly curated and nudged by what the system makes more visible, accessible, and shareable. Together, Scott and Ant explode the myth of technological neutrality. They remind us that platforms are not passive tools. They are active participants in cultural reproduction. They reflect the social order and often amplify its existing inequalities, whether it's the AI therapist reinforcing normative ideas of care and the idea of counterfeit intimacy, or how TikTok promotes certain beauty standards and silences others, or how Spotify algorithms boost major labels over independent artists. The system is never just reflecting us, it's producing us. So when we scroll, stream, swipe, share, we aren't just expressing who we are, we're engaging in a complex choreography. Think of it as a little TikTok dance with code, capital, culture, and institutions that shape who we become or who we can become. And that more than anything, is the sociological message at the heart of this module, right? How do we look at this? So to close this lecture up and to kind of take a longer lecture and bring it to conclusion, let's revisit the argument of this lecture. Marshall McLuhan warned us about the medium itself reshapes how we think, feel, and experience the world. Not just what we say, but how we say it, and through what form. Steve Matthewman takes that further, reminds us that the platform era, technologies don't just shape our perception, they shape our personhood. TikTok, Tinder, Spotify, Instagram. These aren't just apps on your phone anymore. They are cultural infrastructures, scripting new norms around intimacy, creativity, identity, success, and even ethics. They coach you on how to be seen, how to feel, how to speak, and how to love. These platforms don't merely host our behavior, they organize it. They don't reflect who we are, they train us on who we're supposed to be. And in doing so, they turn everyday life into a kind of performance of a Goffmanian stage of dramaturgy, one that's curated, compressed, and is always just one algorithmic misstep away from invisibility, right? So then you become panoptically lensed, observed on everything. So things to take to your yellow dig posts as we're coming to a conclusion here. What versions of yourself does this platform reward? What kinds of posts, styles, behaviors, or vibes get visibility? Who profits from your performance emotionally, socially, economically? And what might it cost you? Not in likes, but in labor or authenticity if you stop playing by the rules. Because in a world where we live through platforms, the question is no longer just who we are, but who we're going or who we're being shaped to become. It's not just who we are, but who we're being shaped to become. And sociology gives us the tools in a class like Tech and Society to start shaping clearly. So let's keep looking. Please keep engaging on Yellow Dig, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, y'all.